section, who is working here in London. And today we're going to talk about the work we do here, and we would like to welcome
del equipo al conversatorio Impacto de la minería británica en
to
Chile.
Impacto. We would like to welcome everyone here to this webinar, The Impact of British Mining on Chile, Challenges for the New Constitution. We would like to say that this session is going to be recorded and we have simultaneous interpretation that you can select through one of the buttons that you can see in your screen. So you can hear the webinar in Spanish or in English. If you have any problems, it's probably because you don't have the latest version of Zoom. So please update. We would like to thank Veronica and Elle that they are going to be interpreting simultaneously today.
Well, hi everyone. I am Armando Caroca from London Mining Network. Welcome to the seminar Impact on British Mining in Chile, Challenges for the New Constitution. Before starting, we want to remember that this session will be recorded and we have the option of simultaneous translation that you can choose in your option bar down below next to record. You can choose that language. And if it doesn't work, you need to install the up-to-date version of Zoom and then log in again. Ok. Como les comentaba, este evento está organizado por London
I was
Mining
saying before, this event has been organized by London Mining Network, and it is a network of organizations that I work with, and we work with indigenous communities that have been affected by mining companies based here in London. Our objective is to put an end to the impunity they enjoy and make mining companies accountable for their actions. We want to halt their unethical practices and create an alternative narrative that respects different cultures. And if you want to learn more about our work, you can check our social media platforms.
La coordinación y difusión del evento se ha hecho posible gracias a varias organizaciones.
This event has been possible thanks to different organizations that are supporting us. The first one is Latin American Bureau, or LAB, which is an independent publishers and registered charity. It was founded in the late 70s and has published over 150 books on Latin America with the aim of raising awareness and increasing understanding of the region in the English-speaking world. LAB has always sought to amplify the voices of those fighting for social justice in Latin America by reporting from the viewpoint of the region's poor and marginalized communities, its indigenous peoples, women's groups and trade unions, and its ethnic minorities and faith communities, and by bringing to light their stories of resistance and their campaigns for change. We also have the support of Ciudad Común, which is a platform that aims to be a space for the production of collective knowledge, opening up debates on urban and territorial issues to all actors involved in making, thinking, planning, and producing cities, with a special focus in the quality of life of inhabitants and their rights. It also seeks to create new proposals and challenge the neoliberal political and academic agenda prevailing nowadays in Chile. And finally, we also have the support of the Asamblea Chilena in Londres, which is going to be presented by Carlos González, an architect and academic in Chile. Carlos?
Hola, buenas tardes.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Carlos González.
La Asamblea Chilena.
And I'm part of the Asamblea Chilena, who was born after the civil unrest in Chile in 2019. Our aim is to coordinate actions and to create solidarity groups here in London. We also want to denounce what is happening in Chile and to make everybody know here in the UK. We are doing all this with the aim of stopping these violations of human rights. And I would like to say that Chile inherited a constitution created during the dictatorship in 1980 and imposed a neoliberal model that has degraded the environment and the life of the people in Chile. So we are happy we're part of this session.
y candidatos
with
a los
everyone here today and with all the candidates to the Constitutional Convention to talk about the impact of mining companies now and in the future,
particularmente británica, ¿no?
especially
En-
British mining companies in our territories and in the whole of Chile.
Saludo a todos.
So with further ado, I just want to say hi to everyone here,
Dejo la palabra ahí.
and that's
Muchas
it.
gracias.
I give the floor back to Armando. Thank you very much, Carlos. So in this space today, we will debate and reflect about the best mechanisms to move towards an anti-extractive society and how a new constitution can lead the way to a structural change. We want to talk about how the current system is damaging our environment and our lives, and how by recognizing the natures, the indigenous communities, and our own social, economic, cultural, and environmental rights, we can actually achieve a very needed change.
Para contextualizar, como ya muchos deben saber, el estallido social
As you may know, the 2019 social outburst showed the incompatibility between an extractive neoliberal model and social justice, democracy, and human rights. It is not possible anymore to hide the wide inequalities, the lack of security, and the environmental crisis that this model has created. The government and economic elite solution has only been to radicalize the current model through privatization measures and the violent crackdown on the social movement, violating repeatedly human rights. The pandemic has shown the wide disparities and the economic precariousness to which this neoliberal model has led us.
El gobierno ha demostrado que le importa más mantener los intereses de la élite económica.
The government has shown that they are more worried about the mining industries than the Chilean people. And they've done this from a series of bad decisions.
Tanto en el norte como en el sur.
What's more, they have tried to take advantage of the pandemic to secretly approve privatization projects in the north and south that will affect indigenous communities.
Una puerta para construir los
So, as we said, this is an opportunity to build a new reality which focuses on human rights and environmental rights. So here we want to talk about the impact of this model based on extractive activities that has degraded our lives.
Operando en Chile, ha degradado por años nuestra vida y nuestro territorio, y de qué modo una nueva constitución
And how
podría...
a new constitution could restrict the actions of these mining activities.
Hoy son,
Today we have 3 candidates to the Constitutional Convention, and I would like to introduce them. Firstly, we have Cristina Dorador Ortiz. Hi, Cristina. She's a candidate to the Constitutional Convention, and she is supported by Movimiento Independes del Norte. She's a microbiologist in the University of Antofagasta, which is a very important topic. And she also works in the University of Germany.
Es parte de la red Investigadores de Chile.
She's also part of the Red Investigadores de Chile, Más Ciencia para Chile, Anetil Mercurio, and a lot of other things that I don't have time to mention. She's been part of the media to talk about different topics very relevant to Chile.
En segundo lugar, tenemos a Lucio
We
Cuenca.
also have today Lucio Cuenca.
Hola, Lucio.
Hi, Lucio.
También candidato a la convención.
He's also a candidate to the Constitutional Convention for Voces Constituyentes in District 12 in Florida. He's an engineer. He's the head of the Latin American Observatory of Environmental Conflicts, or OLCA. He's headed by the Red Metropolitana No Alto Maipo y el Movimiento por el Agua y los Territorios.
Manfred Max Neff, 1993.
He worked in 1993 in other electoral campaigns. Maybe you don't remember, but I do. And he's been part of different fights to protect the environment, for example, in Pascualama. Then we have Oriana Mora.
Hola, Oriana.
Hi, Oriana.
Ahí está.
There she is. Hi. She's also a candidate to the Constitutional Convention for the Licanantay people. She is supported by the Atacameños communities. She's from Peine. She's a teacher and has a degree in indigenous rights and public policy. She's always been defending the rights of these territories from the mining companies where she lives. She was also part of the assembly in this territory between 2018 and 2019. Then we would like to say hi to Verónica Uranga, Victoria Uranga, sorry, who was invited but couldn't come because of health issues. So we hope that you get well soon and we see you soon. We would also like to remind you that the event is being broadcasted on Facebook and here, and you can all ask questions. Every participant will have 15 minutes to present their ideas, and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. And they'll be able to answer the questions that you send us during this webinar. We ask you to please provide us with the questions during the event so we can send them to the interpreters and they can take a look at them. Okay, so now I'll give the floor to Cristina Orador so she can introduce herself and talk about her experience in Antofagasta. Cristina?
Hello, good afternoon. Hello to all of you, and thank you very much for inviting me. Thanks to the London Mining Network and the other organizations that you mentioned. Now, I've got a presentation. Is it okay if I just share? Okay, I'll just make it a bit bigger.
¿Se ve bien ahí? ¿Grande? ¿Sí?
Can you see it fine?
¿Se ve bien?
Is that okay? Yes,
Listo.
it's fine. Great.
En estos 15 minutos voy a tratar de
So
resumir.
over these 15 minutes, I'll just try and summarize a few different issues related to the questions that I was asked about the impact on extractivism in Andean wetlands and salt flats. I'll also talk about my motivation for being a candidate to this constitutional convention. And in particular, I'm inspired by the environmental crisis that we're facing and the crisis due to extractivism, which has affected Chile, and it has had a particular impact in the north of the country. So for those of you who don't know, the north is a very broad region. It's a desert region. The Atacama Desert includes the plateau regions. It covers Argentina, Bolivia, and it's an arid region characterized or distinguished by its two mountain ranges on the coast and the Andes. Now, if you go look back over the past, millions of years ago, there were lakes which over the time dried out and formed salt pans. This is an example of one of these. And these are vestiges of the history. They have a very high level of biodiversity because there were various endemic species. And they are sources of water because there is salt water underneath the salt pans. There is also rain that in the winter periods is also a source of water. There are many different populations that live around the salt pans, and that is why they are an important source of sustenance. This is an example in Antofagasta. There are not only salt pans, but there are also other forms of water, such as freshwater sources and salt water. There is also access to groundwater sources. Now, all of this water is always evaporating, and there is always more water evaporating than than reaching the ground. So it's difficult to tell how long this system will be able to go on. It could be hundreds of years, thousands of years. In fact, this region is one of the areas that has the greatest solar radiation. So all of the species that live in this zone, including the humans, have to be very adapted to this radiation. There's a high level of biodiversity, and there are certain species and ecology that is not found anywhere else on the planet. However, it's still a very fragile ecosystem, so any kind of change can have an enormous impact. Now, my work is with microorganisms. So these are organisms that are not visible to the naked eye. Bacteria, for example. These are very important because they this is a system dominated by microorganisms. And these microorganisms are essential for the life of other species. Thanks to the bacteria in this region, there is a type of sugar that is created. It has a sticky characteristic, and this helps the reproduction of species in the water. Now, this has an important source of food. Now, we're talking at absolute micro scale here. This is a really tiny scale. And so there is tremendous diversity here, various different sorts of bacteria. Some of them are typical bacteria, which you find in the earth. And they are particularly located in the salt flats in the north. So they have a very important role.
Hola, disculpa que te interrumpa.
Sorry for interrupting you. Your presentation has stopped being shared. Could you try and share it again, please?
Disculpa.
Sorry about that. Yes, sorry. Because I can't see anyone, it's difficult to tell.
Obvio.
No sé a dónde llegué, a ver.
Los caracoles.
Estamos todos entusiasmados.
Ya, en los caracoles. Ahí está.
We're all in our own little world. It's very hard to see each other.
Acá están los caracoles. Ya, ahí se ven los caracoles.
Okay, so can you see these shells?
Ya. Bueno, lo que les contaba es que los caracoles son fundamentales en las comunidades.
So what I was saying was that these shells are very important to maintain these reactions that I was describing. So I just wanted to highlight that these microorganisms are absolutely essential for the ecosystem. Now, sometimes it's a bit difficult for people to imagine what we're talking about because it's such a microscopic level. But we're talking here about structures that have been evolved over many years. And you can see in this green part, there is the salt flats. This is oxygenated bacteria. And there are very rich, there's rich diversity of species in these particular areas. In fact, many animals just rely on this, such as flamingos, who extract their food from this. Now, all of this helps us to understand biodiversity at microbial level. There are insects, mollusks, and so on, but we also have bacteria. Here are some of the examples. This one is quite well known in the microbial world because it can help in antibiotics and it can treat cancers. There's another one next to it, which was completely new. It was only discovered in this particular area, very high above sea level. And these are particularly adapted to the environmental conditions. Of course, they have to be because it's so high above sea level. And so it means that their exterior is unique in the world. So this is very interesting to see how nature is adapting to the environmental conditions. So when we come back to the issue of mining, how is mining affecting the salt flats? And what is their relevance for the country and for nature? How can we incorporate them into the Constitution? Now, one of the most well-known is the Salar de Atacama. It's one of the biggest in Chile, and it is a very important source of lithium, which is a very popular product at the moment. This is an example of a piece of salt that has been extracted, and you can see that the various different bacteria on it. In fact, this is very typical because people would take, tourists like to take photos of it. So this is an area where there is high use of lithium. And you can see that there is this pump which sucks all of the salt brine, the salty water out of the salt pan, and then it dries out. And we start to see this, this drying process. This in the green section is where there is the highest concentration of lithium, which is left over.
Quisimos estudiar también si es que existían microorganismos vivos en las salmueras.
Now, we were surprised to see that there were, we found out that there were living organisms in the brine. This picture shows concentrated and natural brine. And we also discovered that there was a high biodiverse community of bacteria living in this. So there are organisms there. Even though the salt content is the highest in the earth. So just to give you a sense of what this means, if you use table salt, the maximum that you'd be able to get is, well, you'd probably see something like 200 grams per liter, so it's very salty. So apart from lithium, you can also see these microorganisms in the salt brine. Now, this is something that we don't often take into account when we consider extractivism. Things have changed significantly over the last 20 years, so you can see this model, how the extent of the extractivism has changed over time. In the northern region, for example, the lithium extraction has boomed, principally due to decarbonization and renewable energies. You can see this photo that the scale is similar to the size of 20 football pitches. So really it is tremendous scale. Now, because of this demand, approximately 40% of the salt pans in Chile have been either explored or are being exploited for lithium extraction. They are not protected. Often even those in national parks are not included in the, as in the salt pan is not included in the territory of the national park, it's been left out. So this means that concessions can be granted for extraction. Now, this is really a race against time to try and protect these salt pans. We need to be able to get deeper understanding before they disappear. There has been significant impact, such as in Maricunga, which has been exploited. There have been diggers. There have been process of evaporation, and all of this has had a significant impact on the salt pan. Now, all of these need to be named as sanctuaries of nature as a minimum. There was one, for example, in a lagoon in Tebenquiche, which has been given this title, and this should apply to all of the salt pans in Chile. They should have the same level of protection. So this is an important issue. Technology is developing very quickly. Lithium is likely to be replaced by some other kind of mineral in the short or long term, and yet the salt pans are irreplaceable. Once they're gone, we cannot get them back. They have been essential for economic history, and they've also been important in British history. because there are various connections between Britain. Now, there are various fossils around the salt pans, and these are the remains of saltpeter extraction, which was also British mining. Now, it's not the areas around the salt pan, it's the salt pan itself which is being mined. So there are whole sections of the Atacama Desert that have been devastated by this process. And now it is not saltpeter, but lithium that has replaced it. We just got 5 minutes left. Okay, so I just wanted to share this all with you because we have a lot to learn. And I think this is important. We need an alternative to extractivism. It's important to understand more about the area. Now, there have been many fears about the fact that there has been a desertification process, which is linked to the copper mining industry. This is the case in many different mines. I can show you the different examples of environmental damage. Here is boron. Here is another example. When we arrived at this particular place, there was no water left. This is an example of a community trying to stop extraction. So there's endless damage that has been caused by mining. And the most serious problem is in this particular salt pan. We can see that the water table already dropped, and the authorities were very slow to act. They were trying to think about watering the salt pans, about literally putting water on the salt pans to try and replace the water level, but this doesn't work. Now, this is a picture showing the difference between 1984 and 2016. You can see that there is significant irreplaceable damage to the salt pan. There's another example of one salt pan being used as a tailings dam. And I could list numerous environmental tragedies, all kinds of different salt pans that have been affected. So we're not thinking of technocratic solutions to this. We need political, cultural, social, and constitutional changes. For example, the demand for water has increased because of the increasing mining. But here we're talking about the increase in seawater, not continental water, that has increased. I think it's also important to use thermosolar plants, which can also have an impact. We could see these as micro disasters. Every little event can have a serious impact. So to conclude, Chile has great microbial diversity, and they can help us to really understand the ecosystem. It's important for Chile to comply with its requirements, and it's important for the Constitution to be ecological, to have an ecocentric vision. It is important for there to be real decentralization and to recognize the rights of indigenous peoples and the rights of and the importance of nature. We need to end extractivism. We need to move on to other models. There is the human right to water, of course. We need a right to live in a healthy environment, and we need environmental and intergenerational justice. We have all kinds of expertise that can be passed on from generation to generation. And we need to be restoring damaged ecosystems. So thank you very much. and I'm ready to answer any questions you may have.
Presentación muy,
Thank you very
muy
much, Christina, for your presentation. It was very interesting.
algunas de las cosas que discutimos.
Let's go back to some of the things you talked about later. But now let's move on to Lucia Cuenca. If you could just give us your perspective on the constitutional process and transnational extractivism. Thank you.
¿Estás por ahí?
Sí, hola.
Hello.
Buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Todas y todes. Bueno, ya se me hizo una presentación, solo quería...
Well, I've been introduced already. I just wanted to add that I am candidate to a territorial and social organization in the District 12, which is composed of 5 assemblies and municipalities. La Pintana is actually one of the biggest municipalities in Chile, and it's included in this district.
Por tener comunas densamente pobladas dentro de este distrito.
And this is one of the main characteristics of Chile that has municipalities that are highly inhabited. I also wanted to thank Armando, Javiera, and everyone who has made this webinar possible, and also Cristina and Oriana, my 2 colleagues and candidates to this constitutional convention. I would also like to thank all the organizations that are behind this process. Also Richard, I saw him here, from London Mining Network, Carlos, and Tom from Lab, who is also here today. So it's nice to see you all again and to share this debate in the middle of this historical context that we're living right now. I'm not going to talk about this again because Armando just talked about this as well. But what I would like to do is to focus on different political and institutional aspects that are part of the current situation, and some things linked to different proposals and different opinions that we would like to introduce in this new constitution. It is obvious the importance of British mining companies in Chile, and the great presence of big companies at an international level, like Anglo American, BHP, Glencore, Rio Tinto, and new ones that have just emerged in the local or regional level in London, like Antofagasta Minerals, or Inversora in Chile, which is dealing with rare earths next to Concepción, which was a Peruvian mining, but it's also present in Chile right now, and that has just joined this new project, and this a new kind of mining that we didn't know in Chile. And there are new concerns because of this new mining that it's happening right now, and their attempt to stay in the middle of this environmental crisis that we are living. All these projects, all these mining activities have conflicts with the environment, and they're mostly related to water. And they are part of these neoliberal extractive activities that we have been seeing for the last years. So they are part of a neoliberal model, and it's also inherited from the dictatorship regime. We cannot forget that the extractive model has created different tools that also support and provide guarantees like free trade agreements or different treaties that in the case of the UK are inside a package of decisions between the European Union and Chile. And then in 2017, they started negotiating a transition to a new context. And I'm talking about Brexit, about UK leaving the EU. So because of this, a new agreement that had been signed a year before, it was signed and it led to a new agreement between the UK and Chile, now that it's not part of the EU. So in order to understand some of the things I'm going to develop, I would like to talk about the Constitution from 1980, the Constitution of Ricardo Lagos and Pinochet, because although it was reformed some years ago, the reforms were very small, so we cannot forget these two, that these two people participated in the Constitution. And it's the only constitution in the world that includes this kind of characteristics linked to the political system, and that talk about the socioeconomic model that we have had for the last 4 decades. So we have to mention that in this constitution from the 80s, the supremacy is in hands of the private enterprises, the free trade, and it's a constitution focused on individual rights. It's a constitution that from an extractive perspective, it does things like guaranteeing the privatization of water, the reprivatization of mining activities and minings, and understanding the nature as a thing and not as an ecosystem. So then we're only talking about material things that are tradable or can get privatized. And in this general framework that I'm talking about, there are different guarantees that are provided to the mining activities. The privatization of the mining was one of the key drivers. And also during the nationalization period of the 1971. So the Constitution of the 80s is based on these measures that go beyond what we can stand or what is acceptable for the management of any country.
Y en ese sentido, por ejemplo, la Constitución del 80.
So in this sense, for example, the 1980s Constitution allows, even though it maintains some articles about the nationalization of mining in the 70s, it gives the possibility of concessions, of mining concessions to private hands. That then happened because of this concession law. And then we have the current situation in which the mining, especially the copper mining, represents the 70% of the private mining in our country. And this is our reality right now. But then the Constitution also establishes that these concessions should be done through a court. So the access to the soil prevails through other rights. And this is part of the Constitution. And in any other part of the world, the Constitution brings these guarantees to mining activities. It just happens here. So there are things that are achieved because of the Constitution, and then other things that are achieved because of the mining concessions law. So this is the mechanism that all these measures make possible. Because there are different norms and rules that make it possible for these mining concessions to be permanent. And then there are other bodies like the Water Code that privatize water. And then we also have the Mining Code that establishes the water for mining, which is a direct tool for privatization to use the water that it's in a mining site.
Te quedan 5 minutitos. Eso nomás te quería.
Sumado a eso, los beneficios tributarios, o sea, tenemos una actividad.
All the benefits from these extractive activities remain in private hands. And this is because of the Constitution. The Constitution allows this to happen. And in this sense, now that I'm part of this, well, I'm the candidate to this constitutional convention, I'm part of this process, we can remember everything that has led us to be here. We cannot talk about the Constitution without talking about the environmental crisis we're living, and specifically the crisis in Chile. We could talk about special characteristics of this crisis in Chile, but we don't have time to do that. But basically, behind this profound environmental crisis that Chile is living right now, in lots of territories that have made life, especially in the north and in central Chile, that it's characterized by a lack of security. Life is very precarious, and they've got limited resources to survive.
Hay que sumar una serie de mitología que de
We
alguna
should also talk about different aspects that have been inherited from the beginning of the 70s and that has survived through time. Like mining as the wage of Chile, all this is just mythology. This is not the reality anymore, it's not effective. And that's why we should talk about it in the middle of this situation. And for us, it is important to remember that we should not just talk about the decentralization as other organizations have done and other candidacies during this process. The topic is not the nationalization, it's the extractive activities. It's also the nationalization, okay, and the control of the state, and to try to recover these common goods like mining, like water. But the main topic is extractivism and what allows this activity to happen, and all the impact in the environment and in our territory. And in this sense, without any doubt, we need to get to a new system through this constitution, get to get to a system that respects human rights, that it's based on solidarity. respecting everyone's rights, respecting the environmental rights.
¿No? Estableciendo mecanismos de democracia directa,
We want different mechanisms for a more binding and direct democracy that we don't have now. Right now, it is just a centralized system where the decisions are made in Santiago by the central government. We should deprivatize water, guarantee access to water, but not just that. What we want is to deprivatize the water and recognize it as a common good, as a human right, and guarantee the access to water, to lay down in the Constitution the right to use the water and who has the priority to use it. And then to consider nature as a common good, as a subject of rights, and to move forward to a new social paradigm that has into account the current situation we're living right now in our country, and that takes into account indigenous communities, but also the new society in Chile. So, in summary, decommercialize the Constitution, change the focus of the Constitution, and take it towards a profound democracy, the decentralization, the plurinationalism, a feminist society, and a society that really guarantees the rights of nature, environmental justice, social justice, and we could keep going, different characteristics, but that I think are the foundation to defend ourselves from these extreme extractive activities that we have right now, and that has been supported by the Constitution made by Pinochet and Ricardo Lagos. Thank you very much, Lucio. It's been very interesting. Now I'm going to give the floor quickly to Cristina, because we're running a bit behind. Sorry, I'm going to take the floor. I'm going to give the floor to Oriana Mora. So please, Oriana.
Hola, Oriana.
Yes, I'm here.
Entonces,
Hello, I'll give you the floor now.
Muchas gracias.
Great, thank you.
Bueno, yo quería contarles que como pueblo indígena Licanantay, como
Just wanted to say that as a member of the Licanantay community and as a community
somos una de las
from
comunidades
Pene, we are communities who have, some of the communities who have been most affected by mining.
Lucio operan dentro
So
del
as Cristina and Lucio have said,
mineral y BHP
this
también.
has had an impact on our community.
Increíble, pero tenemos que mencionar también toda la destrucción que
I also want to mention all of the destruction caused by mining, especially the salt flat in Punta Negra that was destroyed. So this forms part of our demands.
Años, ¿cierto? En crear una condición ecológica en donde vivían flamencos.
This ecosystem has developed over the years. It has an important source, it is an important source of food for flamingos and so on. And it's part of our territory and part of our way of life. But I just want to give you some more of an idea of our vision. And I think to do that, it would be good for me to tell you a bit more about who we are. Lots of people don't know the indigenous populations in the north very well. So we are people from our community and people from the territory. So in our language, it's Licanantay. We are recognized under the indigenous law from 1953. And we inhabit the areas of the San Pedro de Atacama, the River Loa, and other areas. We've been living in this territory for around 3,000 years. There are various evidence of our culture.
Con todo lo que significó luego los procesos de conquista y colonización también. Y todo
now, for us, there have been significant processes such as the conquest and other ideas that have been imposed upon us, such as property. Our region is an arid area, and our social and political and territorial organization is surrounded by the Atacama and by the mountain ranges. So there's an oasis around the Atacama salt pan, and that is one of the most inhabited areas. So we have some sources of water, but they're quite limited. And for us, this is a sacred area. For us, as some of my colleagues have said, water is at the heart of the dispute with the mining companies. First of all, there is the issue of lithium, and then there is mining and how this has affected people in the community. So that is why it's been at the heart of our dispute, and we wish to integrate water into the Constitution. As a community, we also continue to carry out our rituals related to water. This has remained and continued on the territory. It's very closely connected with the different sites, environmental sites, such as hills. And these hills have been with our population for a long time. We have family ceremonies every year, and these ceremonies are part of our agricultural calendar as well. Many of the mines in the territory, some of them are no longer in use, have actually been worked by us in the past. I'm talking about the Incas and even the people before the Incas who were working these mines, seeking metals such as copper and gold and silver. This mining continued through the Inca period. And in fact, many of these sites are now being mined by big companies. They may not be international companies, but they do have a big responsibility for the environmental damage. So over time, we've had to move around in the territory to different areas. For example, we would change with communities on the plateau, but on the coast. This has changed with the saltpeter mining. The community started to use their income, and many companies ended up using indigenous labor for various tasks in the mines. Another example of indigenous labor is the railway in the desert. This was created with British capital. And this significantly changed the society and the Licanantai people. We all know what then happened in the Pacific with the saltpeter conflict. Which came to an end in 1883. As indigenous peoples, inhabitants of the region, we've had many more relations with Chile. And this has particularly affected us because of the Chilenization policies. And I think there's a close connection with what's happening today.
pago de tributo que antiguamente lo hacíamos, ¿cierto? Con eso se desconoce el dominio de parte nuestra a las tierras ancestrales.
Because of the mining companies, there's been a failure to recognize our ancestral lands. And because of the regime, mining was allowed to settle in the area because many people who, many of the companies that set up in the territory did this before the introduction of the indigenous law. We have various conventions that protect indigenous rights, such as the ILO 169 convention. And these set out the rights of indigenous peoples, rights such as self-determination, autonomy. These are binding mechanisms, and they ensure that indigenous peoples should be consulted before any mining, for example, is allowed on the territory. But this has not happened. This didn't happen in San Pedro de Atacama or in many other cases with mining.
También el convenio 169 de la OIT reconoce a los pueblos indígenas como tales, ya nos reconoce.
So Convention 169 recognizes indigenous peoples as and our social, cultural, and economic rights. It's important under this law for the population to be consulted and to participate in the consultation on any project that might affect us. But it's been very sparsely implemented. We do have a decree. But we haven't been able to really fulfill our rights. There is a real problem when it comes to legal recourse in the case of protecting ancestral rights. This is particularly the case with mining projects in the north. The ancestral demands of the Atacameño and Licanantay populations have not been recognized. All of this territory has been parceled out as concessions for copper mining, rare earth metals, silver, and many other metals. The regulatory framework around indigenous people should also protect water. But there has been a process of private appropriation, which has enabled individuals to hold rights to water and to other natural resources. Often, a small country might come along, perhaps even with a farmer, and they try to reach some agreement with the community. And then those rights to water have been sold on to a corporation. We've witnessed many violations of our rights. And we believe that recognition of these rights in the Constitution would be useful. There is no explicit recognition at the moment, which is why we need recognition under international law to be respected in Chile. Now we do have access to different water sources, for example, groundwater, which surfaces in certain places. And this is how we supply our needs and our crops. But much of that groundwater is also exploited by major mining companies. The problem is that all of the water systems are connected. So if some areas are affected, sooner or later, other sources are affected too, and this will affect our the water we have for our own needs.
¿Cómo queremos que este buen vivir?
So you asked me how the principles of buen vivir and our own principles can be represented in the Constitution.
Que dentro de las últimas actividades que se han realizado como organización indígena al interior de las comunidades.
Well, as an indigenous organization working in communities,
como también de la cuenca del río Loa y las comunidades que habitan en
we are
Canadá,
aware of what's going on in the River Loa and the Atacama salt pan. And we have held what we call congresses, which is a space where we can talk about buen vivir.
No es un concepto el buen vivir, sino que es un modo de
Buen vivir
vivir.
to us is not a concept, it's just a way of living that is coherent with nature. It's based on community, and it's very deeply rooted. It's been recognized in various constitutions such as Bolivia's and Ecuador's. But buen vivir is something really that we live. And I think it's very connected to there's buen vivir and buen morir, so good dying as well as good living. We need to think about our responsibility to the next generation. How are we going to give the future generation a better home? And how can harmony and balance with nature help us? I think we need to change the paradigms, the understanding of human beings at the center of everything. We think that nature and it's a reciprocal relationship between us and nature. We need to care for nature just as nature cares for us. We receive food, we receive shelter from nature, but we also have to protect nature, and that's part of our principles as a population. So we believe that being able to exercise the right to buen vivir in the north would help us to ensure access to water. If we don't have access to water, as a people in the desert, we simply cannot survive. That's why it's important for us to be able to integrate this concept into the new constitution. And this will govern all of the conversations that we'll have about the extractivist and neoliberal economic model, about the approach where we simply extract as much as possible. All of this will be changed by the idea of buen vivir. So as a community, we believe that it's absolutely essential. And we wish water to be considered as a living subject. We believe that water has a spirit and it's a part of our ceremonies, which is why we would like the right of water to be recognized as essential. That's what I wanted to share with you. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, then do let me know. Thank you very much, Oriana, for your presentation. It was very interesting. Thank you, Cristina, Lucio, and Oriana. I think it's very interesting to bring the three of you together because it helps us to get a perspective on what's going on in Chile in terms of mining from very different perspectives. As my colleagues from the London Mining Network have said. I know each of you have your own visions. For example, Cristina, you come from a scientific perspective. Lucio, you're talking about extractivism, and Oriana, you have the indigenous perspective. So between the three of you, I think we can get a clearer idea of what we need to do. It's interesting because what you're suggesting actually is not that different. You have much in common. So you can share that in the process of drawing up the new constitution. So now let's move on to any questions. We've been collecting up the questions. My colleague is just collecting up the questions. So you can ask any questions to any of the three. The first is about if we have a new ecological constitution in a historically mining country, how can we ensure that there is more sustainability in the environment? What do we need apart from constitutional changes to do more than just improve the existing projects?
¿Yo? ¿Perdón? Ah,
¿Puede
Lucio.
ser? ¿Cuál?
No, Lucio estaba...
Lucio,
bueno.
a ver. Ok. Cristina, entonces.
Sí.
Cristina?
Bueno, la situación es bien compleja porque
Well, the situation is quite difficult because of the economic model. There are different demands, and the lithium demand is really high. It comes from the global north.
electromovilidad va a
And it's
haber
because of this transition to clean energy.
lo que debería haber, porque tampoco
So what
hay...
should be present, and sometimes I talk about this and some people don't agree, but this is my feeling really.
No ha habido nunca un
There has
altiplano
never been a salt flat without mining in the south of Chile.
No se toca
Mining
casi.
has always been present, it's untouchable. So it's very difficult to talk about these topics. Now I've got more freedom to do it. It used to be taboo. I remember when I was a child, and to say that mining had an environmental impact, it was crazy. So now we can talk about it, and we can also talk about salt flats, which are very fragile, and not lots of people know about them. And especially they are important because of these microorganisms that I was talking about before. So I think we should have everything in common. We should have an open and honest debate. If we keep going like this, then salt flats will disappear at some point. And there are 52. The total of lithium reserves are high, but they won't last forever. So there are different ways to achieve this, and that should be applied to the extractive operations. There is not enough evidence, there is not enough impartiality, and a lot of projects that stopped, and then they got the go-ahead, as it happened in Atacama and in different places in Chile. There are also new technological advancements that talk about extracting lithium and not water, but I don't really know this is the solution either. So what I think is that this lithium extraction should be limited to what we need. Okay, this lithium is essential for the transition, but do we need that much? A family in Europe needs 3 electric cars, 4 laptops in the house. I think we should also talk about reducing consumption, and this is something very important that affects globally, not just Chile. Whenever they get what they want in Chile and the salt flat can't be used anymore, they will start using other salt flats in other countries. As there are different questions, I am going to get some of them, and I'm going to ask all of you to participate.
Una segunda pregunta sería,
There is a second question here.
Entonces, él dice dos propuestas de cambio para...
And he says there are two change proposals for the Constitution. One is to reduce extractivism and incorporating environmental reparation methods. And the other one is the nationalization of resources. How can these two cohabit? And how are they linked? Maybe Lucio wants to say something about this?
Sí, o sea, yo creo que una de la entrada de la pregunta que hace Carlos.
Well, in my opinion, at the beginning of the question is very well formulated. We need to reduce extractivism. And he says through environmental reparation. I don't know if this is thinking about the new extractivism or the one that it's already in place. There is a social, environmental, and cultural impact in the territories affected by the mining that happened before and the mining that is happening right now. And it's unethical to keep going like this. It's unethical what is happening in these territories. So without any doubt, it is essential to reduce extractivism and to set some limits. It is also important to nationalize or renationalize this activity and allow only the commercialization of this mineral. And I think this is something complementary. It's not just one or the other. These two possibilities can cohabit and are actually linked. And we should talk about all this and lay it down in the new constitution. And how and why can a nature area be declared as a protected area? This is also an important topic. We should talk about glaciers. There are 5 projects that have just started and are currently destructing glaciers. And glaciers are very important. And we should talk about other projects. There is a huge amount of ecosystems that shouldn't be touched. But then on the other hand, we have what the territories want, what the inhabitants of these territories want. There are communities that have expressed that they want to be free. They don't want these companies to be in the territories. When we talk about decentralizing the power, is to take the power of decision, of making decisions to these territories, so they can decide about the future, about what they want. And it doesn't depend on a decision that has been made far away. And on the other hand, I would also like to say that all this is because of the recovery of the sovereignty. However, here we should also talk about the economic activity of Chile and its presence in the international world. And that's why we should also talk about free trade agreements and TTP and what comes from these free trade agreements. And this, it's also a strategic point in this debate, and we should always remember it. Thank you, Lucio. I would like to ask a question. It is my own question, but I would like to ask Oriana about this idea of the redistribution of nature. And I think it's important and it could be part of the Constitution. You think there is a way of linking this notion to other national ideas or projects? You think the Licanantay community could have a self-determination that it's separate from other projects or from other ideas? How do you think these two things can cohabit? So the nature and el buen vivir with other cosmovisions and how they can be introduced in the new constitution.
Creo yo que el concepto del buen vivir, sí, el concepto del buen vivir no lo estamos planteando solamente para el mundo indígena.
Well, I think that el buen vivir concept is not just something important for us. I think it should be considered for everybody in Chile, for the whole population. Because for us,
indígena es donde mejor podemos encontrar la
and this is
biodiversidad.
not just a coincidence, in the indigenous territories, we can see a huge biodiversity, and it is because we have protected the environment.
Ahí hay una persona que está.
We can hear someone who didn't mute herself speaking on the phone.
Ahí, por favor. Ahí.
Okay,
Sí.
yes, I think it's okay now.
Entonces, creo yo de que cuando estamos planteando eso, no
So I think that when we talk about el buen vivir, it's not just something that applies to us, it's something that applies to everyone. This concept needs to be debated, but not just it is enshrined in the Constitution, but also to know how
de qué manera lo vamos a hacer carne y de
we
qué
are
manera
going to make this concept real,
dentro de las políticas que
and
se
how it's
empiezan a
going to be part of the new political measures,
vamos a considerarlo. Porque, por ejemplo,
and how we're going to consider it. Because, for example, we think that lots of projects that happened in Bolivia, for example,
pero aún así
they
han
had el buen vivir, but they still have some problems with current projects. So we need to debate about how it is going to be included and how it's going to be incorporated, this new concept,
Ahora, con
in
respecto a la libre
the way
determinación, creo que
of
todos los pueblos indígenas estamos hablando de poder ejercer
living
y esto no tiene que ver con
in our new reality. And this doesn't have to do with us being independent of Chile. We're still part of the territory, but inside our territories and inside our communities, we want to make the decisions we think are the best decisions for us, and we can do things as we want, and we couldn't before. For example, today, we had to accommodate
a los estudios de impacto ambiental, con la participación, en vez de que
to
sea
what other people wanted, instead of us having our self-determination and us being asked what we wanted, if we wanted mining, for example, in our territories.
Por supuesto, esto va a tener mucho
There are
que
municipalities in Ecuador and Bolivia that decide what they want. So I think this is what we should be talking about. And I think this is what we want to be enshrined in the new constitution. But we're not just thinking about ourselves, we're thinking about the future of the whole country. We think about what other generations are going to inherit from us. Are we going to leave them dead salt flats? Well, big portion of these salt flats are in indigenous communities and in Licanantay communities. So we are facing a threat. And if we don't protect our water resources that feed these salt flats, we are all going to extinct at some point. So as I said, we are not thinking about right now, we're thinking about the future as well. We're thinking about how
mejores condiciones, ¿cierto? Para que
we
las futuras
can
generaciones
make conditions better so the future generations can exercise the rights we couldn't exercise, like the self-determination. Thank you very much, Oriana. I've got other questions that can be for any of you.
Aquí la envió Cristian Olmos. En noviembre del 2020, el gobierno británico tomó un paso importante en acelerar un futuro de
In
transporte
November 2020, the British government took an important step towards eco-transport by gradually phasing out gas and diesel cars by 2030. British government will give incentives to boost the sale of electric cars and charging points for vehicles at home. Of course, these measures don't take into account the lithium and copper used, or where it will come from, and it's certainly not the communities affected by mining. How can a new constitution protect against the measures that come from outside of Chile?
¿Cómo vamos a enfrentar estas presiones?
How are we going to face the pressure towards a green transition?
Que en apariencia es más ecológico y que
It may
tiene
seem more eco-friendly,
recursos aparentemente ecológicos y
and it may seem to be based on ecological ideals
eh,
and related to climate change.
se puede responder.
Any of you could respond to this.
¿Yo? ¿Voy?
I can go?
Sí, dale, Lucio.
Yes, go ahead.
Sí, sí, hay varias aristas en ese planteamiento, ¿no? Que
So there are various
sin
aspects to
duda
this
la fuerte
question.
presión y el nuevo relato
There is the
de las compañías
new
mineras
narrative
y
of mining
y
companies
también del gobierno
and the
chileno en
pressure from
compañía
the
con
Chilean
con
government
las
and
empresas
from
mineras
companies
transnacionales
and
están
transnational
poniendo
companies,
la ampliación de la frontera minera, sobre todo de lo que denominan los
which are
minerales
trying to
críticos,
expand mining,
para
especially
ahora,
for
antes era
these kind of
salvarnos
metals.
y llevarnos al desarrollo, ahora es salvarnos de la crisis climática y sus
Before,
consecuencias,
it was
¿no?
supposed to be
Entonces,
about development, and now
como
it's about
vender otro
saving us from the
paradigma
climate
en ese
crisis.
relato minero.
There has been a
Pero
paradigm shift in this
que hay que
narrative,
entrar a desmenuzar y poder ir como a la profundidad de estos temas, ¿no?
but I think we
Sin
need to
duda,
get into
primero
details
creo
when we
que
think
este
about these
es un discurso
topics.
muy fuerte en cómo se concibe la transición
It's a very
para enfrentar la
persuasive
crisis
narrative
climática
when
en
it
los
comes
países del
to
norte,
transition
¿no? Y sobre todo
against, to
sin
protect
cambiar
against
el
climate
modo de
change
vida,
in northern countries. Without
reducir las
changing our way
emisiones.
of life, how
Solo
can we
es una
reduce
mirada de
emissions?
reducción de emisiones sin considerar el resto de las cuestiones que están asociadas. Dentro de
But you
eso,
can't reduce
los
emissions without
impactos
thinking
que
about all
tienen
of
los
the other
países
issues that
del
are
sur.
associated with it, hence the
Y
impact
ahí
on
tenemos
southern
todo
countries.
lo que es el greenwashing, tenemos bueno, una serie
We've
de
talked about
adjetivos que
greenwashing
acompañan ese
from
proceso.
North American
Y creo que
companies,
nosotros
for
tenemos el
example.
desafío justamente de tener una mirada más
And so
integral
our
y
challenge
más
is
soberana
to
también, ¿no?
ensure that we have a more
Desde
integrated and
nuestros
more
países
sovereign
frente a eso.
perspective
O sea,
within our
no se
country
puede
when faced with
justificar
this.
la creación de nuevas zonas de sacrificio
We cannot
en
justify
función
the
de que
creation of new
en
sacrificial
el Reino
areas
Unido cumplan sus
so that
metas
in the
de
United
reducción de
Kingdom,
emisiones
people
frente al
can
Acuerdo de París, ¿no?
comply
O sea,
with
creo que
their
esa es una
Paris Agreement
mirada
commitments.
muy estrecha y muy unilateral y que
We need to work
reproduce
very
la
carefully
lógica
and
colonial, la lógica capitalista
unilaterally
más
to
extrema,
avoid
y creo
the
que
extreme
tenemos que
capitalist
exigir
approaches.
también e instalar en la nueva constitución de
We
manera
need to
soberana,
insist and
por
we need
ejemplo,
to integrate
recuperar.
this into the
Hoy día la
Constitution
política minera de
on
Chile
our
está
sovereignty
privatizada,
because our mining
derivada de
policy
todo
is
esto que está amarrado en
privatized.
la constitución. Hoy día la política minera la hacen las empresas, la hace el Consejo
In
Minero.
fact, it's the
Hoy día
companies
no
that
tenemos
determine
una
mining
ley de
policy.
protección de
We don't
glaciares
have
porque
a
son
law to protect
las
glaciers
compañías mineras las
because
que van a
mining
bloquear la
companies are the
posibilidad de que
ones
se
who will
legisle
block
hace por
the
lo menos 10
possibility
años
to do this.
tener una buena ley de protección de glaciares.
They've
Pero
been doing
también
this for
van
the
los
last 10
sindicatos
years.
mineros apoyados por las empresas
And it
a
also comes
bloquear la
from the
posibilidad de
trade
tener una
unions
ley de
supported by
protección de
the
glaciares. Bueno,
mining
ese
companies.
tipo de cosas obviamente tenemos que enfrentarla con una
So we need to
discusión
face
mucho
these
más
kinds of challenges
franca, abierta,
with a much more
transparente,
open
que
and transparent
permita
approach.
recuperar soberanía en muchos
This
de
will
los
help us
aspectos
to
que
recover our
no solo
sovereignty
significan
in many
nacionalización,
areas,
sino que
not just in terms of
decisión
renationalization,
sobre múltiples aspectos, ¿no?
but
Hay
in
que
terms
ver,
of
por ejemplo,
decisions
en
about
esto,
various
claro, se habla de autos
issues.
eléctricos y de dónde viene la energía. ¿Quién se
Now we talk
encarga de
about
proveer la
electric cars,
energía?
but where does the energy come
Las
from?
zonas de sacrificio en Chile están asociadas
From
sobre todo a
sacrificial
la
zones in
generación de
Chile?
energía sucia, digamos, ¿no?
In fact, that is a form of
Se
a
van
dirty form of
desencadenando
energy.
cosas que creo que en un debate mucho más abierto
So I think we
como
need a
este
much
en Chile
more
tenemos que
open debate.
colocarlas sobre la mesa para
We need
que
to bring these
recuperemos
issues to the
soberanía
table
en muchos
so that
aspectos,
we
entre
can
ellos
recover our
definir nuestra
sovereignty,
propia política minera y no dejarla
determine
en
our
manos de los
own mining
intereses de los
policies, and not be at the whim of companies.
Muchas gracias, Lucio.
Thank you very much, Lucio.
Ya no quedan muchos minutos, pero voy a intentar
We don't have very
contestar
much time
algunas
left, but I could just have time for a
preguntas.
couple more
Estaba
questions.
publicando algunos de los reportes que London Mining Network
I can see that they're
y
posting various
otras
reports by
organizaciones,
London Mining Network.
otras organizaciones como World on One, etc.
and other organizations such as War on White. So a question for Cristina.
Nos preguntan cómo aportarán los científicos a la resistencia de las comunidades.
How are scientists contributing to resistance? Well, the knowledge that we're creating will help the decisions of the convention, but it also comes from individuals and from local communities. Often there have been stereotypes about the scientists being an elite, that they're cut off from people.
Y que ahora con mayor razón las comunidades
But now more than ever, communities are interacting more with scientists.
muy valioso.
Knowledge is essential, it's really valuable. And all of us together can create expertise. This gives us sovereignty and autonomy. It gives us regional autonomy to take decisions, and it helps us to manage the pressure on the environment and on individuals. You were talking about sacrificial zones. Now, I don't like talking about them because I think it creates tremendous stigma in the communities. Lots of people from some towns that I've spoken to said this, that they feel the stigma, they feel that their future has been sacrificed. It's a very deeply rooted feeling. So before, I remember, for example, that my family was a part of the resistance movement.
Sin embargo, la respuesta del Estado centralista fue
una
zona de concentración industrial.
Important because this is an important moment because the state responded to resistance in a centralized way. Unfortunately, centralization has been a problem in this. Centralism decides who to protect and who not to. So, for example, forests or glaciers may be protected, but salt flats are not. The North has been completely neglected. Not even our economy has been protected. Just from a study by the University of Chile, we can find out that there are so many things in the north of Chile that have been left behind. That's why we need a voice here in this process, so that we can be repaid for this debt that exists. So yes, academia contributes to knowledge. We participate in decision making. We have been involved in various environmental processes, and many academics are active in this respect, others are not. But in the long term, this is changing.
Muchas gracias, Cristina, por tu
Thank you very
respuesta.
much, Cristina. Thank you for your answer.
La última, diría yo.
Now, just one last question.
Para Oriana también me
I have a
gustaría
question for Oriana.
más allá de la discusión
I just
constitucional.
wanted to go beyond the conversation about the Constitution. What is the role of regional bodies,
Por ejemplo, a través de los países del Triángulo del Litio,
such as cooperation between the lithium triangle countries?
con algún tipo de acuerdo o organización regional.
How can regional organizations contribute to this new constitution?
De diálogo
Oriana, have you seen any kind of dialogue in that respect?
para organizarse en la región.
To try and get organized in the region?
Nosotros ya lo estamos haciendo como
Yes, it's something we're already doing as a community in the Licanantay and Atacamenia peoples. We have gathered together to discuss this great threat to the territory. And we agree.
La relación con respecto a la normativa cambia en cada uno de nuestros
países. Of course, there are
países.
different regulations in each of our countries.
Como Chile estamos siendo como el mal ejemplo.
I think Chile is really a bad example of how to do this. This is how we do not want to act. And people in other countries are fighting to avoid the same thing happening.
Salinas Grandes, de todo el sector argentino.
There are communities such as Salinas Grandes in Argentina have salt flats, and there they are extracting
de Atacama,
minerals.
que luego con el tiempo se fue perdiendo eso, pero aún en
Over
esa región
time,
se mantienen estas
um,
canteras de sal donde íbamos a
the
abastecernos de
quarries
sal para el consumo humano como
were
también
reduced
entonces creo yo de
so there was less water for human and for agricultural consumption.
entendiendo también de que esta amenaza traspasa nuestros territorios, que es una
But we
amenaza
realized that this threat, it goes beyond borders.
el altiplano por todos
It
los
affects the whole of the plateau
territorios indígenas.
and all
Pero
indigenous communities there.
lo que hablaban los demás compañeros anteriormente tiene que ver también cómo nos vamos a replantear estos paradigmas.
But my colleagues were also talking about the idea of this paradigm shift.
Que hasta nosotros, hasta hace un tiempo atrás, todo lo que sabíamos de nuestro conocimiento tradicional,
Until
y nuestros
recently,
saberes
everything we knew
ancestrales,
about our indigenous knowledge was not considered valid.
hablábamos de que el salar, que era
We were
imposible
saying that it was impossible to
para
put
poder
water back into the salt flat or into the wetland, but this was not taken into account.
nuevamente estos espacios nos van a llevar a replantearnos esto. O sea,
So I think this is something we really need to reconsider.
porque lo dice una
Just because the
universidad,
state says something or a university says it, it doesn't mean it's more valid than what an indigenous community is saying.
permee todo este proceso constituyente que tiene relación
I
con
hope
la
that this process of drawing up the Constitution will be based on interculturalism.
que la hagamos carne y tiene que ver netamente con el respeto
We need to
a
really
esa
bring this to life
que tenemos como seres humanos.
and create a new reality.
Hemos ido aprendiendo a través de los años y a través de
We have learned so much over the years,
permitido seguir existiendo en los territorios.
and this has helped us to survive in our territory.
Volver a plantearnos qué entendemos por salar, qué entendemos por agua. Vamos a entender lo que define la Constitución y vamos
We
a
need to think
entender
about how we can protect water in the Constitution,
que sale de ahí o vamos a entender también lo que piensan las comunidades.
and we need to think about how to do this from the perspective of the communities.
Para nosotros,
We believe that water is the spirit. For us, the salt flat is water. It's not something that can be sold or bought.
creo de que se hace necesario ir al origen de estos conceptos, al origen de estas miradas y ver de qué manera estos salarios se van a ver afectados, porque lo que se está
And so we
trayendo
can use this knowledge to understand how to treat these salt flats,
para que otros y también nosotros podamos gozar, ¿cierto?, de estas nuevas tecnologías, pero a costa
Now,
de qué?
the lithium extraction process means that we can enjoy these new technologies, but who really is being advantaged here? It is at the cost of losing communities.
Entonces,
And I think it's
¿qué es lo
important to consider these questions.
como les decía, en nuestras futuras generaciones?
We need
Pensando
to
en ello
we
y
need to
cómo
think
es
about
el
future generations
de la interculturalidad en donde nos podamos
and
relacionar
interculturalism.
respetando nuestros propios conocimientos.
We need to respect our own knowledge,
ancestrales, como también conocimientos
our ancestral knowledge,
creando en las distintas
and
universidades.
the understanding that we've got over the years. Thank you.
Excelente. Ahora solamente, bueno,
Thank you very
obviamente ya
much,
estamos bien pasados,
Oriana.
pero quería muy rápidamente pedirle a cada uno de los
Now, I just wanted to ask everyone here to tell us in a minute, what are the hopes and challenges for the future of Chile and how your proposals can lead to a better Chile? It's a huge question, but I would like to finish with a positive note. So 1 minute. Cristina, you can start.
Bueno, estamos claramente en un momento histórico.
Okay, well, this is a historical moment, and we need to participate, all of us, and we need to create a new dialogue that includes everyone to get to the drafting of a constitution that makes a difference and starts a new reality, because this is a situation we didn't have the chance to live before. And we want to do it collectively. Everyone has a voice, everyone has something to say. So it doesn't really matter who you vote or what the exact proposals are. I think, well, everyone here talked about the extractive activity, but different points are important. And from my scientific approach, I think it's important to have different perspectives into account. Thank you very much for this space. Thank you very much for the debate. And I really think we have the possibility to go forward and to give importance to people that live in the territories and not just the state and mining companies and everyone that takes advantage of these territories. Thank you very much. Oriana? No, Lucio first. So Lucio, in a minute, would you like to give a conclusion? Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank everyone that is in the United Kingdom. It's very important in this process, and we have felt the solidarity during the last years, and this is hopeful in this process we're living right now. I just wanted to add to Christina's words. In a minute, it's difficult to say a lot of things, but the moment we're living right now, from the organizational point of view, it's not coming in the best moment. But in this process, we have created new conditions that are better, especially because of the creation of new movements or movements that already existed but were not that important before. And we have a lot of hope. This is a historical movement. We want to get rid of the neoliberal system. And here it's where it was born, and we want the neoliberal system to end here. We want a new system that eradicates violence in all its forms, that focuses on life, on the environment, on protecting it, and on all the species. And we are very hopeful, and it's very difficult to express it in a minute. Thank you very much. Lucio, you said a lot in a minute.
Candidato constituyente. Y
And
finalmente,
finally, Oriana Mora, in a minute, your conclusion.
Yo también creo de que
Well, I also think that it's the first time that the indigenous communities are part of a process like this, and that we can get the recognition of our collective human rights as an indigenous community, as the inhabitants that were here before all this Chilean system was implemented. So we want to be represented. It doesn't really matter who exactly is elected, but what we want is to create a better path and a better reality for everyone that comes behind, for the future generations. This is a long-term project. I think right now, we, the candidates to the Constitutional Convention, are going to debate and to talk about the rest of the Chilean population, about what they want to be enshrined in this constitution, and about how we want the future generations to live, about concepts, about these paradigms that we have been talking about today. And I also dream that children that will be indigenous youth in the future have the rights we didn't have, so they can live and have access to self-determination, so they can choose where they want to live and how. So they have water, and nobody has the right to violate our human rights. We cannot really understand how these communities get water from water trucks when there is big canals, big water resources. We cannot really understand this. This is showing the disparities we're living, and that's why it is essential for the environmental justice to exist, that this change happens, and that nature is recognized as a subject of rights, of someone that feels. And I think as a community, as an indigenous community, we have our own cosmovisions, and we can make a huge contribution to this process,
un camino que queremos que sea
thinking that this is what we want
un camino donde
the
también
next generations to inherit.
visiones y sueños para estas nuevas generaciones. Gracias también a ustedes.
Thank you very much.
Con ese comentario muy optimista.
Thank you, Oriana. And with this positive footnote, we're going to say bye.
Agradecemos nuevamente a Cristina
We want
Dorador,
to thank Oriana, Cristina, and Lucio for your time and for your comments. We also welcome everyone that participated to still be part of this process, or if you can vote, maybe you already know who you want to vote right now. Thank you very much for all the organizers. Thank you to London Mining Network, Latin American Bureau, Ciudad Común, and Asamblea Chilena in London. Everything is in Facebook in case you want to take another look. And Javier is going to add the link in the chat and some extra information. Thank you to Javiera Martinez and everyone who helped with the organization of this meeting. Thank you very much. I hope we can see each other soon. Thank you to all the participants, and thank you to everyone who has been here today.
Chao,
See you
gracias.
soon. Bye.
Gracias, Cristina.
Gracias.
Lucio, que estén muy
Muchas
bien.
gracias a
Chao.
todos.
Gracias,
Chao,
gracias. un
muchas
gusto.
gracias.
Que les
Que
vaya
estén
muy bien.